Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and we're doing a slightly different format today because I am interviewing a wonderful Swedish presentation skills trainer named Åsa Rydhard, who was calling me from her vacation home in Portugal. She's fled the Swedish winter and is working in Portugal, working off the battery of her computer. The interesting thing about Åsa, she started in designing computer systems, and then she became a pastor in the church. And from there, she went to being a presentation skills trainer, a speaker trainer, a branding expert, and someone who helps you ace your message. If you look in the show notes today, you will see her full official bio. One of the things that was really interesting today was we had a long conversation about bias and unconscious bias. And what is it like to be a Swede where everybody thinks that the Swedes are perfect, so that there are invisible biases. We also talked about telling stories, how you can do that best, and how do you solve complex problems? It was a very interesting conversation that went in a totally different direction, but I loved it. I think you'll enjoy it too. Here's the interview with Åsa Rydhard. This is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on such subjects as presentation skills, leadership, visibility, and communication challenges. One of the delights about this is that I get to ask people like Åsa from around the world about their expertise. And today we're kind of punting, going through this at the last minute because Åsa is here is talking to us from a vacation place in Portugal, hoping that her battery will last. So we will go as long as we can. Åsa, can you tell us just how do you describe yourself when people say, what do you do?
Well, depends on who asks me, actually.
Okay. Well, let's say it's your great aunt Clara who says
my grand aunt. Oh, if my grand aunt Clara would ask me, I would say, Clara, I help experts to communicate and talk so people actually understand what they say. That is what I would say. Tell Aunt Clara.
That's a good one. Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
and we will certainly post your full bio in the show notes. But in the meantime, I have a whole bunch of questions for you. I love talking to people who also work with presentation skills. But before we dive into that, can you, if you were to have a dream interview, if you were to interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Oh, you asked me this just a few minutes ago. You told me this question, and my brain is telling me only one thing. So first I will go with some big names, but this is what I will say. I would love to interview Mary Magdalene and her female friends in the New Testament era. Because I would love to hear the true uncensored story about being a woman at that time.
And following around a rabbi named Jesus. Yeah. Oh,
yeah. Because first I said, I would like to interview Jesus, but everyone says that. And then I said, no, Mary Magdalene or Agrippa or one of the other strong, rich women who supported Christianity at that time, which the men of the church has been hiding away ever since.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, this actually fits in perfectly with the first question I really wanted to ask you is you've had such an interesting career. You were a computer specialist and you developed computer systems. And then you went off and you were a pastor for many years, a pastor in the church. And then you got a degree in applied cultural analytics. I have to make sure I look at that right.
Yes.
And now you're a presentation skills trainer, a branding expert, a storytelling expert. What is the common thread that brings you through all of that?
Well, you are not the first one to wonder about that. But already when I changed or switched from being the IT consultant that I was, and going into theology and being the head pastor of a congregation, I figured out that my theme, my why, or my theme, my special skills is about solving complex problems within complex networks. And and that is the ability to ask why several times. And don't just, if someone tells you this is a problem, my job is always to look several levels further down and figure out what is the real problem, what is the real need here. So going from working with complex IT systems, which is actually very much about understanding people's needs, because there are humans who uses the IT, the computers. So what I usually meet is people in need of help to solve their everyday problems, but my role is to dive into the net and see what is actually going on there. And going into the church, a congregation is a network of humans and is filled of complex problems. And my role as a head of that church is to dive deep and figure out what is really going on here. What is the real problem? How can we address it? And then I moved forward to the Master in Applied Cultural Analysis. And that is really going deep into understanding humans' needs and what drives you forth, what is really going on here. Because on the surface, most of the things we do as humans can seem very everyday, uncomplicated. But if you start to scratch on that surface, the reality is much more complex than you could ever imagine, and everything is connected to each other. So it's, I think I'm a problem solver in complex networks every time.
Every time. And so now you're solving problems through helping people tell stories. And
yes,
yeah,
and that's and the reason for why I said if who is going to hear my message is because the core of what I do, the essence of what I do, is that I help them pitch and present, selling messages. Is that right?
Selling
Messages
an
that sells.
idea.
Messages, selling messages that sells, or creating, selling an idea with your message, right?
Yes.
And to do that in a proper way, you need to really know your audience and how to touch the heart of the audience. So yeah.
Which of course it seems to me that it's obvious that as a pastor, you would have to be good at storytelling and you would have to be good at selling an idea, even if the idea is try to be a better person, and, be a better person, not just on Sunday morning. But also, I think about the great tradition of literature in the Christian church, at least, that you can draw from, which is all about stories and parables. One of the things, in terms of selling an idea, one of the things that I think about, that I'm often saying, is that anytime you're doing a presentation where you want to move someone to take action, that's a sales speech. Yes. And sales has gotten a bad reputation because many people abuse the principles of making sales. I like to think of it as an enrollment. Enroll them into going along with your idea.
Yes. you're completely right. And I actually had clients coming to me saying, oh, I need your help to present my ideas and catch the interest of my audience. But it's not like I'm going to do a presentation. It's not at all like I'm doing that pitch deck or whatever. It's just at the board meetings, people start scrolling their phones once I open my mouth.
Yeah.
And I say, yeah, you're doing a sales pitch, but you don't know it. So we need to start there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking about board meetings and so forth, when we've had several conversations, you and I, so I'm delighted to be connected with you. You said the other day that you have a lot of personal experience in being blocked as a woman, whereas a woman could only get so far. And frankly, I kind of thought that Sweden had solved the gender equity problem. I thought things were better in Scandinavia than they are in America. Is that maybe not the case?
Well, I think that is also a complex question. The answer is complex anyways. Yeah. So, I have stories. I meet women from like Germany who move to Sweden because they find Sweden being a better place to be. And that's true. But it's also not a better place to be because since we in Sweden and everywhere else who looks at Sweden think that we are so good, it's kind of not okay to talk about the problems we have. And it's like, and it's like invisible, the problems we have. So I once met a businesswoman from India who had a hilarious story about her career story being within a chain of hotels, going up, 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 and how she was upfront confronted by men who wanted to hold her back. In her face, they told her that they did not want her. They did not, do as she said and whatever. And then her boss could step in and address the problem, or tell them off, basically. And I told her afterwards that is actually, to me, such a relief, because the kind of resistance we meet in a country like Sweden is invisible. It's so hard to address. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still there, maybe not as much as in India, but since it's invisible, it's harder to address because you can't put the finger on it, right?
Yeah, yes.
And people can just say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Oh, no, that is not at all what you have experienced. It's not, you're wrong.
When you have, I found that as an American, in, there are people, the assumptions that people make, either they think that they'll never go to America. So I've had people say, I will never go to America because I'm going to walk off the plane and someone will shoot me. And I said, well, it's not quite that bad. Depends on where you go. But I've also had people who grew up watching the American TV series where everybody's rich.
Yeah.
And, back to the old days of Dallas and Dynasty. But even the other things where everybody's rich, everybody's thin, everybody's beautiful. And they cannot believe that there are parts of America that don't look that way, that's a fantasy. So
yeah, but then they meet you and they say, wow, they're right.
Well, I'm not sure about the rich part. I won't claim talented. How's that? Thank you. It's I think dealing with fantasies and archetypes is an interesting question. This wasn't quite where I was heading to go, but I wanted to go today. But I think this would be a good place to explore is how can we use archetypes, images, stories, maybe where people think they already know, and you need to say, well, actually, that's not quite the way it goes. Let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So
how do you talk to people about the invisible reality of prejudice, let's say. Certainly, Sweden has absorbed a lot of immigrants over the last 30, 40 years. Do you deal with those issues? I guess you think of every single Swede as being perfect, tolerant, equality-based. Is that just a fantasy? Is that something we aspire? Is it something you can aspire to?
Well, I think that is also something that is hard to speak about, because if I talk to a boss, I could hear them say, we are totally free of prejudice here. We address everyone the same. And if I hear that, I know that they are full of prejudices, biased assumptions about people, but they don't even see it because they think they are so perfect, right? So how we see ourselves, and that the perfect Swedish people, it hinders us from actually take a deeper look at how we really are behaving, or what we really are thinking, right? And the same is when it meet others, because we already before they enter the room, we have a perception of who they should be or probably are. And that hinders us from seeing the right person, the true person that we actually meet. And that's a real problem, I think. And in Sweden, we have a lot of examples of how people with the wrong name, for instance, do not get or even called for a interview when they look for a job.
Right.
So they need to change the names perhaps, and hopefully once they show up at an interview, the change of the name at least will make it easier for them to make a good impression once they are in the room, right? So but then again, you have the looks, so it might not be the ultimate solution, right? And it's the same as if you're a woman, that is not always maybe being seen as the most efficient professional person in the world compared to a man in a tie.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed is in terms of pitching, I do a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and so pitching tends to be, how are you pitching a startup, a tech startup? Although any sort of sales presentation is a pitch, even if you're trying to sell an idea, women have to prove themselves twice as much, even when the venture capitalists are female. And and I think, I don't know, well, there's no such thing as a human being who is free from bias. We have unconscious biases. Do you have any thoughts about how we can recognize our biases and then choose not to act on them?
I think that's, we need to practice that. I know this because I myself have had those biased presumptions about people before I met them. So it's so hard to see your own thoughts, to hear your own thoughts, maybe you would say, and really, meta reflect. It's a fancy word. Think twice about what you're really thinking. Not everyone is able to do that. But if we share stories in between about what happened to us, I think it will be easier, because stories are a great tool if you hear someone's stories, normally, you come to think about your own stories.
So, Åsa, how can we help to recognize our own biases, or maybe through stories understand what it's like to be in the other person's shoes?
I think two things. So the first thing is to actually share our stories. Tell the stories because of two things. That was what I was going to say. By sharing our stories, we will open doors and make other people share their stories. And that will make us actually start see the world in another way. because it's like we all think the sky is blue because everyone tells us the sky is blue. It's actually true. It might not be blue, right? But we always tell, in the ocean, we say it's blue, but it's actually gray many times, but it's still blue for us, and a proper ocean should be blue. So our world is pre-designed or pre-told to us. This is a proper world. This is how it looks. This is the reality. And that is actually a power game when other people decides for you how your reality should be told or apprehended, right? But by sharing stories bravely and open-heartedly, we can start picturing a true or an alternative story of how the world is actually organized, how we experience the world, and how we can be able to move around in this world.
Oh, that's one. I love that. I love that. It's also, it's when you hear the story of someone else, you begin to have a better idea of what it is like to be that person and what shapes that person.
Yes. And there's, again, several aspects of this, Elizabeth, because throughout my years, I met entrepreneurs and women, many women, but not only women, in leading positions. So many strange things about what it is to be successful and how to succeed. So, for instance, as long as you don't give up, you have not failed. Have you heard that? And that comes together with as long as you believe, whatever you can think, you can achieve. So they tell me that I am not allowed to talk about things that holds you back, or that other people might hinder you, because if I believe that, I will not succeed. So the only way to succeed is to not believe that something could hinder me. But I think that if we make the systematic blocks visible, if we make the obstacles visible, it will be easier for us to actually handle them and move forward.
Oh, I love that. It's as if so many women think that any mistake is a disaster. Little boys are taught, if you fail, if you fall down, well, just get up and do it again. Little girls are taught, if you fall down, oh dear, something's wrong, you've done something wrong. A friend of mine says boys are taught to be courageous and girls are taught to be safe. So learning that failure is not the end of the world. I actually remember back in my opera days when I was working with young singers and rising singers, especially the young men who were on a career. Their career was taking off. They'd done everything perfectly, and they hadn't failed yet. And quite often they wouldn't listen to me, even though my job was to tell them what to do. But many of them were often so busy talking, they had no time to listen. And then I would look at some of the older singers and say, oh yeah, he hasn't failed yet. Yeah, he hasn't, and then you'd meet them a couple of years later and they would have done a show where that was a disaster that didn't work well. And they've learned that, they could fail and still live. You could still survive. So this is wonderful.
And there is one thing about women in business that I learned from research in Sweden. Not sure if you heard this, but when women are hired, they are hired based on what they already achieved. So there is no room for them to be failures, right? But when men are hired, they are hired on what they are. Potential. They are like a promise, what they can make in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, potentials. Thank you.
Yes.
And that, of course, if the society is filled with this kind of presumptions, it is disastrous for a woman to fail.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that women are measured by the visible measurements that we've been taught are measuring the skills that men tend to have. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot these days is how do you how do you measure the value of things not going wrong? Because so many of my clients come to me and they say, I'm totally ignored at the office. I'm a senior director and my department runs very well. So nobody pays attention to me. They take me for granted. And so I've been working a lot on how to talk about things not going wrong. And that has been a very interesting, it's been a very interesting thing to explore. Also with the men who are really good at the details, but they don't brag about it. They're happiest hiding behind a computer, waiting to be recognized.
Well, sometimes you need to teach people how to brag in a proper way.
Yes, exactly. It's marketing. Nowadays you have to market yourself. Yeah.
So brag in a proper way, and that's where storytelling comes into play in a beautiful way, actually. And this is something, I realize the hatred you have about bragging yourself, and throughout my years already from the start, what I hated with my job always is the necessity of bragging about yourself and doing that lobbying in the lobbying in between what you really want.
Yes.
I was there to do a job, I thought, like my clients. That is enough, right? But you need to know how to market yourself, how to talk yourself up.
Yeah.
And do a proper bragging. And maybe I think one helpful thing is to think that it's not really about bragging, it's just really about letting them know who is actually doing the job. And
yes,
you are
exactly.
worth having credit for doing the job.
Yes. Yeah. That is a whole body of work around that. It's a huge part of what I do.
If you don't do that, they will hire or use some wannabe with a silver tongue.
Someone else who's been louder and flashier and talking about themselves. Yes.
Yeah.
Where could somebody start being a good storyteller? So let's end with this before your battery dies. How can somebody start being a good storyteller about themselves?
I think a good place to start is to actually, because this is the easiest, I think, is to tell the true stories about how others appreciated you.
Yes.
Because that is really someone else. You tell about what someone else told about you. So that's an easy brag.
That's a good way, but it's great if the words come from someone else. It's better than you talking about yourself. That's always better.
A lot of keynote speakers do that all the time. They drop stories about how someone else appreciated what they did. It has a special term that I forgot. So that's
third-party verification.
So that's a good story, because when it comes about telling stories about yourself, you can do it in so many different ways. But if you're actually going to tell something by yourself through your own words, I think the third-party verification is a good place to start.
Perfect.
And sharing stories about the what you're doing, and then you can also throw in a few catastrophe stories where you were the hero of the day.
Yes, exactly. Well, Åsa Rydhard, thank you so much for being a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. It's really a delight to know you and really to hear your insights and your ideas. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us. That was the conversation with Åsa Rydhard. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. And if you're curious how your presentation skills are doing, you can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition you deserve. If you enjoyed today, please go to whatever app you're listening on and give us a good review. You can also find us on YouTube and on my website. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.